16 years after a genocidal civil war, Rwanda is now being praised as one of Africa's safest countries. The economy is soaring and women are the majority in parliament. So as it prepares for a presidential election, why are people accusing the incumbent, Paul Kagame, of being a ruthless dictator? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Taimur Nabili. Presidential elections are taking place on Monday in Rwanda, and it appears the incumbent Paul Kagame will almost certainly hold on to the post. But this election's been marred by violence, intimidation and the exclusion of some candidates, raising the question of whether the vote will be free and fair. Andrew Simmons is in the capital, Kigali, with more.
Driving himself from one venue to the next, the thin figure of Paul Kagame has put boundless energy into his campaign. This is the second presidential election since the Rwanda genocide, and here on the ground he treads, thousands were massacred 16 years ago. He's greeted by both Tutsis and Hutus, all recognizing his achievement in turning this small country around with a booming economy and good order. He punches home his message of unity.
We don't want to follow ethnic politics. There is no Hutu, no Tutsi, we are all Rwandese.
Just taking a look around will tell you how popular Paul Kagame is with his people. Few would challenge his extraordinary record on development, but more and more people are asking questions about his record on democracy.
Contrast these crowds with Kagame's opposition. It can't compare with the might and well-financed machine of the Rwandan Patriotic Front. This is one of only three parties allowed to contest. It's the Social Democratic Party. And its leader, Jean Damasan Nahukuriwayo, like the others, had supported Kagame in the last elections, which he won with a 95% majority. Frank Habineza leads the Democratic Green Party, banned from holding meetings after a Congress was disrupted by what he claims were RPF infiltrators. The police came and broke the gathering up. The party's vice president, Andrew Kagame, had addressed the Congress. Later he was found murdered, his head partially severed.
No, we are not radicals. Why do people call us radicals? We just have different ideas from that of RPF. We are not radicals. We have genuine ideas. We are calling for democracy.
Victoire Ingabire is another opposition leader. She's been charged with denying the genocide and having links with terrorists, the Hutu rebel FDLR based in Congo. She's under 24-hour surveillance and can't leave the capital.
Why they say that we are radical? Because we say that we have the problem in the country, because we criticize the government of Kagame. He's not a bit to hear criticize from Rwandese people. But he has to know now that they have opposition, younger people, younger generation. We need political space in our country.
In another backdrop to this election are exiles from the military, amongst them former General Faustin Kayomba Nyamwasa, who in June was shot and seriously injured in South Africa. He claims the Rwandan government was behind the attempted assassination. Paul Kagame dismisses the claims, and he wants Nyamwasa extradited from South Africa to face charges connected to a series of deadly grenade attacks in Rwanda earlier this year. The president insists democracy is on course here. He says the onus is on him to make sure extremists don't put the country back into an ethnic war.
Democracy is not just good for others and for us when we are told to have democracy. Democracy is good for us. We know it. We want it. And only has to be seen as if it is being pushed down our throat, and that's the image you create about us. I don't accept that.
So, is the former Tutsi liberation fighter now a civilian autocrat, or is he right in using firm rule in steering Rwanda to a brighter future? These elections will undoubtedly put him into power for another 7-year term. But whoever is responsible for the violence that has marred the run-up to this poll, there's anxiety inside and outside Rwanda. And many analysts feel that his followers may not march so loyally behind him if opposition voices were given more freedom.
Well, joining us on the show today to discuss this topic are, in Nairobi, Harold Ayodo, a writer at the East African Standard. And from Washington, D.C., Peter Erlinder, a law professor at the William Mitchell College of Law. He's also lead defense counsel for the UN Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the defender of one of the presidential candidates, as you saw in that film there. Thank you, gentlemen, both for joining us today. Harold Ayodo, let me begin with you. How does the situation in Rwanda look from Nairobi?
From Nairobi, when I was recently in Rwanda, I went to do an article on the genocide 16 years ago, and people are really anxious to go and vote. But what they really want in Rwanda is assurance and stability. So all of them are very anxious to cast their vote, and they all hope that the election is going to be a democratic process, and the best candidate is going to emerge victorious.
All right, well, that's your view of how the Rwandans are seeing this. But what about from Kenya? How does the Kenyan government regard this? How is the Kenyan media looking at Rwanda's condition right now? Are they thinking Rwanda is a success story, or are they tending to think that Mr. Kagame is maybe getting a little bit beyond himself?
We're looking at Rwanda as a success story because with the enactment of the EAC, we are looking at the market of over 125 million people in the region. And recently, Rwanda has been a robust economy. It has shown that over the past years, it has an average GDP of 8.8%. 2 years ago, Rwanda had a GDP of over 10%, which is so far the best in the East African region. So we are looking at Rwanda as a living example.
All right. Let's go to D.C. and join Peter Erlinder. Peter Erlinder, as you heard there, I mean, for the African neighbours and residents, perhaps, of Rwanda, the promise of economic development, stability and anything that prevents future ethnic violence is obviously an attractive one. But from D.C., what do you think are the important issues here?
Well, first of all, the illusion of economic growth is just that. According to Herman Cohn, who was in charge of the Africa desk at the State Department. From 1996 to today, the Tutsi-led Rwandan government has been in effective control of Congo's eastern provinces, North and South Kivu. The fact of the matter is the Rwandan military is occupying the eastern Congo, and according to reports
well, that's not exactly supporting your contention
Council,
that the economic growth is a myth. I thought you were talking about the economy.
Well, no, please let me finish. The economic growth is fueled by the occupation of the eastern Congo and the resource rape of the eastern Congo. And it's that rape of the eastern Congo that is making Rwanda's growth appear to be so substantial. Without the occupation of the eastern Congo, the economic situation in Rwanda would be much different.
Okay, let me put that to Harold Ayodo. Do you agree with that?
Yeah.
Yes, I do agree with that. But I am talking from the perspective that Rwanda is centrally placed in the East African region. It borders Tanzania, Uganda, Burundi, and the DRC. So anything which happens in Rwanda and the outcome of the election is going to mean a lot in the East African region.
Peter Erlinder, I mean, you clearly have a broader political perspective and agenda here. As far as the activities in Eastern Congo are concerned, are those really the relevant issues to be looking at in the face of a presidential election in Rwanda?
There are 5 million people, 6 million people now that have been killed in the Eastern Congo because of Rwanda's occupation of the Eastern Congo, and that cannot be ignored in assessing Kagame's role in the region. If we look at what the Rwandan government has done in the region, we cannot separate the election and the continued role of Kagame in that region from the occupation of the Eastern Congo. I'm sorry, but this is from Herman Cohn, the U.S. State Department. This is not me.
All right.
The reason that I was arrested in Rwanda...
Sorry, let me stop you there before we talk about your particular circumstances and your relationship with Rwanda. Now, Herman Cohn may say one thing, but there are plenty of comments from people like the World Bank, from people like Transparency International, talking about how Rwanda's move from under Paul Kagame towards a much less corrupt nation, towards the most stable country in Africa, the safest country in Africa. There are plenty of people who would say that there are some good parts to what he's done, as well as your criticism.
Well, it's certainly true that corruption in the usual sense is much lower. It's also true that as long as you agree with the police state that Mr. Kagame has set up, it is quite safe. However, if you disagree with Mr. Kagame, my situation shows that it is quite unsafe. And if you're willing to accept the invasion and occupation of the Eastern Congo, as apparently the international financial institutions have been willing to do, you have to credit the state with financial improvement. There's no question.
Harold Ayodo, the occupation of Eastern Congo may be, as it stands on its own, a destabilizing and I guess difficult situation to reconcile, as Peter Erland is pointing out. But I guess the question you have to ask is, if Paul Kagame were to go away, would that situation improve at all? And would Rwanda's situation within that region in Africa be more stabilizing?
We can't actually wish away what President Kagame has done over the years since he took over. And from the streets, and what from the streets when I was there is what people want in Rwanda is an assurance and of stability.
But just the straight question, though, I mean, were Kagame to go away, would Peter Erlander's concerns about Eastern Congo also solve themselves?
It depends with the kind of leader is going to take over after the democratic elections, because the person who might win the election might be a better leader.
All right.
So we can only say that after the elections and the new leader takes over.
Let me allow Peter Erland to answer that question too. I mean, you're concerned about Eastern Congo, but that doesn't necessarily. If Kagame were to lose and someone else step into power, do you think that problem would go away?
Of course, there is no alternative to Mr. Kagame now. But the point is that at the ICTR, the Rwanda Tribunal, the charge had been that the side that lost the war had planned a long-term genocide, and that Mr. Kagame's army stopped the genocide. In fact, the leaders of the former army were found not guilty of conspiring to plan a long-term genocide. The evidence was also put into the record that Mr. Kagame assassinated the former president of Rwanda and the president of Burundi, which touch off the mass killing, and that he, in fact, refused to use his troops in cooperation with the troops from the former army to stop the genocide, and that, in fact, the Pentagon had been supporting him during this entire period. The connection between the Pentagon and Mr. Kagame, going back to 1990 and before, was the subject of an article published by the U.S. ambassador to Burundi in Foreign Affairs magazine just yesterday. And this connection between Kagame and the Pentagon being at the source of this difficulty in Central Africa is now beginning to be discussed in U.S. policy circles, and that's really where we're going to have to look in light of the ongoing connection between the Pentagon and Africa now being discussed with AFRICOM. It's a much deeper story than just Mr. Kagame.
All right, well, let's pause there for a minute, because we're going to go now to Kigali and join Shiaka Kanuma, who's the editor of the newspaper Rwanda Focus. Thank you for being with us, Mr. Kanuma. Now, we've just been talking about what seems to be a very difficult balance between what Kagame appears to have achieved for domestic Rwandan politics and, as Mr. Mr. Erlander in DC is saying his own very troublesome personal history. How does it look to you from Kigali, this situation here? Is Kagame the right man to keep leading Rwanda?
First of all, thank you for having me. Before I answer that question, actually, I would like to express my dismay as a Rwandan to be sitting here listening to Mr. Erlander's statements, which I can only qualify as conspiracy theories that no one has proved. So really, I was listening to him a few moments ago, and I'm asking myself, what is the point of these statements? Because one, to sit there and accuse and say someone's shot down someone's plane without any forensic evidence to support that, without any conclusive evidence to support that, and sit there and conclude something like that. I as a Rwandan who lives in a country that has suffered a big shock, tragic, like the 1994 genocide, I find it really outrageous to listen to this. Now, can you just help me and repeat the question, because I was...
Well, yeah. let me ask you then, what exactly is it that Mr. Erlander has said that you think is so wrong and that you so object to?
Well, yeah. But him concluding that Paul Kagame deliberately shot down the aircraft, which is something that people are still investigating, that no one has conclusively found evidence of, that no one has conclusively found the culprit of, is really very, because this is the kind of thing that conspiracy theorists always advance to say, look, Paul Kagame shot down the airplane so that the genocide can happen, which we find very outrageous.
Okay, Mr. Erlander, let me give you the chance to respond to that, but let me also point out that your personal history with Rwanda would tend to make your comments for some people be slightly less than balanced because you have a problem with the country. So please explain that to us as well.
Sure. In 1997, a report written by James Lyons, a former FBI agent, Michael Horrigan, a Queen's prosecutor from Australia, and Amadou Demi, the military intelligence officer for General Dallaire of UNAMIR, was given to Louise Arbour, the chief prosecutor for the Rwanda Tribunal, concluding that Paul Kagame should be prosecuted for the assassination of President Habyarimana, was presented in January of 1997. All right, well, listen,
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
I am quoting that report. That report is in the record at the ICTR. It is also on the website, www.rwandadocumentsproject.net. It's that report that concluded it, not me. It's also Judge Bruguière from France, Judge Morales from Spain. That's what I'm quoting.
I want to leave that there if we could, because what we're talking about here is the presidential election, and we don't really have the time to go into so much complex history. Let me go to Harold Ayodo and ask you, I mean, Kenya has had its own problems with violence, with tribal conflicts and that kind of thing. Do you think that the attempts by Paul Kagame to minimize the possibility of further violence are supportable, and the way that he's gone about it, some people call it dictatorship, do you think that his priority here is correct?
Having experienced the post-election violence here 2 years ago, I think what Paul Kagame should do is to ensure that the elections are democratic, free and fair, and he should do anything which he can to stop flare-ups which are going to lead to bloodshed. When I was there 2 months ago, Rwanda had enacted some anti-genocide laws.
All right.
Anti-genocide laws, of which anyone who followed the laws were sent to court.
All right, let me stop you there, and we're running out of time. I just want to put another question to Sheyaki Kanuma in Kigali. You heard there Harold Ayodo saying, you know, the issue of fairness and freedom to vote is a key one, and surely by preventing a free vote, Mr. Kagame is actually making his own future much more difficult because he's alienating the population.
Well, it depends on what you define as a free vote, because where I'm sitting from in Kigali, I can tell you no one has been prevented from voting whoever they want. So obviously, I might have joined this interview a bit late. Maybe you referred to some other people there who I might not have been privy to. But from where I'm sitting, if I may repeat myself, everyone's going to vote, and they're going to vote freely, and no one is going to be violent against them not to vote whoever they want to vote for. What does that mean, sir? Because we have about 4 different parties contesting the elections, so I think there's enough choice there.
Let me come to you for a final word, Peter Erlinder. You know, the complexity of this situation is enormous, very clearly, but surely at some level you can understand that 60, 70 years after the Second World War, the issue of the Jewish genocide is still a very raw one. 30 or 40 years after the Cambodian genocide, the issue there is an extremely raw one. For Rwanda to emphasize the need for trying to maintain some kind of stability and prevent that kind of thing from happening again, and instituting a law that is designed to do that is entirely understandable, isn't it?
Well, it's understandable if what happened is accurately being described. The current government says that a genocide of Tutsis and moderate Hutus took place. However, all of the monuments are to Tutsi victims. My client, or former client, Ingabire, asked where the memorials to the moderate Hutus are. And because she raised that question, she was charged with genocide denials. I would suggest that if we want to heal the wounds, we have to recognize that both Hutus and Tutsis were killed during that period. And then I think we have the possibility of reconciliation.
Shiaka Kanuma, a final word from you on this. Is reconciliation possible in Rwanda under these conditions, as Peter Erlinder just put?
Yeah, I think reconciliation is very much possible, because if you look at what's happened anyway, it's self-evident. Hutus live side by side with Tutsis. And don't forget, there are also Twas. Those are 3 ethnic groups that live side by side, and who have had a troubled history right up to 1994, from the colonial years beginning 1930s to 1994. But in the ensuing period since 1994 to 2010, you'd really have to be kind of a hyper-skeptical person not to acknowledge what has happened here. I'm telling you, I have Hutu neighbors, I have Tutsi neighbors, everyone lives in harmony. And this is not just a story. Anyone who is on the ground in Rwanda can tell you. All right.
Thank you very much indeed. There, gentlemen, we are going to have to leave it because we have run out of time. I want to thank all of you for joining us. In Kigali, Shiaka Kanuma of the Rwanda Focus. In Nairobi, Harold Ayodo with the East African Standard. And in Washington, D.C., Peter Erlinder from the William Mitchell College of the Law. Thank you all for being with us, and thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of Inside Story. As always, we welcome your comments and suggestions, so do email us if you can at insidestory@aljazeera.net. Goodbye for now.